Wherever you're listening in the world, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Israelcast, the podcast powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. I'm Stephen Shalowitz, first reminding you that for 120 years, Jewish National Fund USA has been the premier philanthropic movement for the land and people of Israel. While best known for planting trees in Israel, JNF USA contributes to Israeli life in so many ways, including community development in the Negev and the Galilee, preservation of heritage sites, supporting people with disabilities, and connecting high school and college students to Israel. To learn more and to see how you can contribute, visit jnf.org. Once again, jnf.org. Now, Jewish National Fund USA, as you may have heard, has launched a year-long campaign called Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. The campaign consists of 12 one-on-one conversations with Russell Robinson, Jewish National Fund's visionary CEO, and 12 panel discussions. Our featured guest on this episode is Virag Guyash, one of the 12 individuals chosen from around the world to have that one-on-one with Russell. And as we record this, that conversation between Virag and Russell will be launched just in a few months' time, in October 2021 to be exact, and will always be available on Jewish National Fund USA's YouTube channel. And from what I understand, some of the global thought leaders are absolutely phenomenal, including Virag, who joins us now via Zoom from Atlanta, Georgia, where she is visiting a new museum and some other folks down there. So welcome to Israelcast, Virag.
Hi, Stephen, and hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh,
that wasn't an easy in the making, right, to get this Zoom.
Should we tell Virag the backstory? Why don't I have you tell the backstory behind that?
Well, the adventures of a missed flight, a storm, a canceled flight, and all that. So yes, it's been an adventurous trip here. So
right, but you made it, and that's the most important thing. We're once again absolutely delighted to have you join us. The joys of travel, as we say. Now, listen, Virag, usually I do an introduction to a guest and I give them their background, but I really want to dive in right now and have you just sort of share with our listeners how you got from point A to point B, how you got to this point in time, because you really have such a remarkable life story, a remarkable journey. And then from there, I'd like to unpack.
I see you were not up for the challenge to sum up my past.
Listen, it was very, very difficult. I was able to sum up the part that you started roller skating. So we're going to talk about your roller skating adventures towards the end of the show. But you've really had such a remarkable life that I almost felt like I wouldn't be able to do it justice. And so I wanted you really to talk about some of those highlights in your life. And as I said, then from there we can certainly unpack.
Sure, I was just teasing you.
I know.
I really appreciate the nice and good words, because sometimes when we look at ourselves and our journey, we don't even see the highlights or what it might look to an outsider. So my dad sometimes tells me that I lived like 4 or 5 lives in one already. So he says that he's actually really proud and sometimes like envy me in a positive way, how I can restart things and how I can just get into a next adventure if my heart desires that. But to answer your question, I am originally from Hungary, hence the accent that I'm like using as my sex appeal. So I was born into the communist regime still. So I was born in 1985. I know what it means to live under a regime, even though it was very much the ending of it. But it is part of the story, and the reason I'm saying it has actually a function in my life, how I see the world, because of the stories that I've been told, through my parents, and how I saw their life being censored and stopped. And compared to that, what a freedom I have to do these adventures that I'm facing right now. So when it comes to Jews and Israel, that was not something that I grew up with. In fact, I grew up in a very, like a rather anti-Semitic environment. And this is when people, like blink and just want to move on from me. But first of all, don't do, because cancel culture doesn't do, a good thing for our future or to the society at large, because we need to be able to change. That's the notion of the human being and how we are. So I'm okay to say that I was having a very anti-Semitic background. And under that, I mean, I was simply ignorant. I wasn't hateful. I was not, like viciously hating Jews. It was simply not in my proxy what happens with Jews or Israel. So all I knew was the Jewish jokes, and the stereotypes around this community. And again, mind you, I was born into an era where we didn't have social media, so my first phone I got when I was 16. Social media opened up the world to me when I was 19 or 20. So it was not something that you could just absorb whenever you wanted. My relationship with the Jewish community ended in the fact that my classical ballet academy was in the Jewish district in Budapest. So my picture about Jews were that everyone is a Hasidic Orthodox Jew. And I understand how stupid or dumb it sounds today, but we have to put things back into the time's perspective. So as I said, no internet, no big globalized world. We just
No
came out of
Netflix, for example.
exactly. So there were no movies that you could even, for better or worse at least, watch. I think that's very, very important to understand. So my whole journey with this community and with my Zionism started in 2012. And, I would discredit life if I wouldn't admit that it started with an Israeli guy. So I was dating an Israeli person.
In Budapest?
No, in Brussels. I lived in Brussels.
When because we should explain that you started out as a ballet dancer. You were trained as a ballet dancer.
Yes, I was trained as a classical ballet dancer. So I spent 10 years in a very Russian academic education that, again, give me a lot that I'm trying to use to my advantage nowadays, but it also took away a lot from my childhood, or it has its trauma effects, that I at least needed to face once I stopped dancing. But I got a contract in the opera house in Hungary, which I refused to accept. And instead, I was the first girl who ever went abroad. And I got a contract in the opera house in Zurich, in Switzerland. I was dancing there for 2.5 years. And then I got a contract in the Danish Royal Ballet. And once I got the contract, I just knew I'm not going to continue dancing. It was just something, inside me broke. And people always ask, why did I stop? It would be easy to say I broke my ankle, but no, it's something inside me that I always wanted to do something with my mind also, not only with my body. It was a very big, powerful fight inside me, So then I kind of restarted, and I was going to another college that would make sense in the big world, as opposed to, saying that you're an artist. I had zero idea what I wanted to do, obviously. And then I got, after I graduated in international relations, that was my bachelor about, I got an opportunity to work for the Hungarian Foreign Ministry. I went through like 10 lines of interviews, and eventually I got the position, and they sent me to Brussels during the EU presidency when Hungary was the presidency leader. And I spent a year in that position. And after which I just stayed in Brussels, and I was working in different communications and different roles in communications. That's where I met this Israeli fellow.
There you go.
That's how it started.
It always starts with a love relationship, doesn't it?
I don't know about that, but it's sometimes people are like, okay, so that's why. And I'm like, this is such a discredit actually, or disservice to the whole activism I'm trying to do, because that guy is not in my life anymore and I'm still here, or
well, there was a reason why he came in your life, though.
Yes.
So
and that is why I also mentioned.
Yes, so he is in your life, but he's not physically in your life,
yes.
right? The sort of halo effect. So you met this Israeli guy, and then I understand that you went to Israel with him.
Yes, very quickly and very early in our relationship, he said I'd come to Israel. And I was like, I am not really sure there are too many Jews there. So that's a starting point. And I'm like honest about it, because the reason I am actually okay to tell this, because first of all, that's the truth. Second, if I could change and I could make, the little changes in my life, then other people can too. So I don't want people to think, anyway, I'm coming from a Zionist background. It's a natural cause for me to stand up for Zionism. No, nothing was natural about this. So I went to Israel for the first time with him. And he showed me from Rosh Hanikra to Elat, we went to the Galilee, so everywhere. And somehow Jews were nice. And I was like, what's going on? These Jewish people are actually very welcoming. I went to Shabbat dinner to various denominations and practicing Jews. And the first couple of times in Israel, I was like a happy tourist, beautiful Israel, and that everything was appealing. And then slowly but surely, I started to dig deeper. And since then, I went back 20 times, and many things have happened since then.
Well, you clearly have developed a fascination with
Yeah.
Israel and a deep understanding of Israel. And talk about then your Jewish education and how that came about.
Like when I started to say I like Israel, even that particular ex-boyfriend was, oh, you just, you like the beaches. But I knew that something deeper is sticking in me. Like the first time I arrived at Ben Gurion Airport, I can't explain. And there are things that you just simply can't explain in life. Something shifted in me, the smell of the country. I don't know, it was just a very bizarre experience for me. And I tend to be spiritual even more as I age. So I now find the answers in these, little nuances, the feelings we get, the hunches, the intuitions. And when I went to Jerusalem the first time, I legit had a full panic attack at the middle of my tour there because of all the energies and everything that I just experienced. So the Jewish education came after a couple of years of going back to Israel. And then I started to, understand that there is something off when it comes to the picture of Jews and Israel. So in Brussels, where we lived, we went to the big supermarket, and you know that they have these international food sections. So every time there was an Israeli food section, either the flag was torn down or the Israeli food was put under the Spanish one. And by that, I was so emotionally connected to Israel that I was just repacking everything, like it bothered me. And then I started to dig deeper, like, why is it? So, the whole new world opened up to me, starting with BDS, with the double standards against Israel. And then I returned to Israel. I started to interview the IDF soldiers. Are you guys really, the child killers here? Or like, what's going on? I started to talk with the Arabs in East Jerusalem. And then I understood their notion, or at least a generalized one. And then eventually I just wanted to know more. And I worked in communications. So I knew that in this way, I can start working for Jewish causes if I want to. But I felt that I really bring added value if I actually understand the nuances of history, that I really dig deeper. And this is how I ended up at Touro College in Manhattan. And I did a master program there in Jewish studies.
Which is quite significant. And I would have to imagine, though, that it wasn't easy to be admitted because, I mean, let's face it, you weren't yeshiva educated, for example, right? I mean, you were almost, dare I say, starting from scratch, weren't you?
Definitely, yes. So the dean at Touro College on this particular department, Professor Michael Schmidtman, he interviewed me for 3 hours. And he really was put at the test, I think, because in retrospect, he told me when I graduated that during the interview process, he saw in my eyes that there won't be a no. Like I won't accept a no as an answer. But he told me, like you don't have a yeshiva background, you don't even have a bachelor in Jewish studies, you are a first non-Jew ever trying to get into this program. But somehow, I convinced himself about my genuine interest. And he actually was so genuine that, the department and the school, that I got a full scholarship so that actually I could attend and do this program.
Well, really, congratulations, as we say, kol hakavod to you, really. Right, b'vakasha, because I think it's really quite remarkable and quite admirable that you went really from 0 to 60 with that. Yes. How is your Hebrew then, by the way?
אני מדברת, אבל אני לא מדברת טוב מאוד, אבל אני מבינה. I understand a lot.
Oh, right. As we all do. We'll have to put subtitles if we put this up on YouTube, for example, or I don't know how we're going to do that. Is the podcast?
I can answer your question again.
Yes, that's all right. That's all right. But listen, but these days, I mean, your main job is a communications consultant. You're also a journalist. However, the reason why we want to have this conversation with you is because you are a real Israel advocate. And I want to talk a little bit about your Israel advocacy, because again, here you are, you're a young lady that is from Hungary, grew up in as you said, a very anti-Semitic environment, and it wasn't mean-spirited on your part, it was just a lack of knowledge. Mm-hmm. And when you became educated, then you were able to understand, and then you were able to educate and really inform as well as inspire others through your knowledge. And you did take the time indeed to understand the backstory behind the Jewish people when it comes to Judaism, as you just said, you know, through studying through your master's degree. So let's kind of talk a little bit about the Israel advocacy world today and where you see some of the main issues and challenges that are facing Israel and facing really the Jewish community. And then I'd like to talk about some of the solutions and how people can get involved.
That's not an easy question that you are posing here. I think there are a couple of main issues, especially if we check back on this year alone, when the level of anti-Semitism is spiking and extremely high in the US. I do not think that the diaspora Jews are angry enough yet, or that they actually really see the latitude of the issue. Somehow it's interesting that I don't want to compare the situation, and it's obviously not an intelligent thing to do, but we need to. In 1930, the Jewish people kind of felt the same way like now, that, oh, we are assimilated enough. We are good people. We are decent citizens. Nothing can happen to us. Oh, they are breaking into Jewish stores. Okay, happens. Tomorrow it's going to be a new day. And today, when Jews are being violently and physically attacked in the streets of Manhattan, Los Angeles, and in between, and there is no actual loud vocal unity and mobilization to fight this back. A horrible example is the BLM. The movement's notion is not something that I can ideologically approve and support for all kinds of reasons, and that can be, a subjective topic here, so I don't want to go into that. But what they achieved this year and last year is something very important. Today, if I say something that is remotely calling out the Black community, I'm immediately racist. I should feel shamed about myself. I should feel guilt to even dare saying something like that. When it comes to Jew hatred or anti-Semitism, it's business as usual. There are no consequences. And I feel that we are failing in this front, that we just let it pass and we normalize anti-Semitism, both online and offline. So that's, I think, the first and foremost biggest issue that we are facing right now.
You just mentioned the word shame. We just had Ben M. Freeman on the program here, and we also had him on our Jewish National Fund reading series. And he, of course, has his book, Jewish Pride, and he talks all about this notion of shame and, trying to overcome that shame. And the other thing that he also talks about, and I believe you have as well, and I want you to weigh in on this, Virag, is this notion that anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem. It's a non-Jewish problem that affects Jewish people. Can you talk about that? And I'd like to ask you the same question that I posed to him, is what's really in it for anti-Semites? And what's really in it for anti-Israel crowds to give it all up?
I think, it was Rabbi Sachs who said first, what starts with the Jews doesn't stop with the Jews. And this sentence is extremely important. And I don't know how, PC I need to be on your show, but I like to be factual. And the reason it is not a Jewish problem, because it is an ideological problem that we see today. It's way bigger than that. And yes, it starts with the Jews. But as someone who survived 2 terrorist attacks by Islamic jihadist terrorists, it is not only a Jewish problem. There is an ideological shift today that they want to put on us and pressure us to accept, that goes against family values, that goes against any kind of conservative thinking, that goes against religion. And that is why I believe that, anti-Semitism is just the first drop in this big ocean of problem. And if we are not tackling that, and we don't unite, and we don't stand up for our Jewish fellows, then, the next one again is us. I'm really missing the unity. Why is it that when Black people go on the street, look how many white people join them immediately without even being asked to join? when Muslims march, the same, everyone suddenly goes with them, and including so many Jews. But when it comes to like a Jewish mobilization or like a Jewish action, they are alone, or we are alone. Why is that, And there is this big problem, I think, in society that, for example, whereas Black people are always considered the underdog in the society, regardless of the fact that they have opportunities and chances, but Jews are always considered as the white, rich, colonizer, privileged people. So they are not considered as a minority group in the pejorative sense, or in the challenging sense that, okay, it's a minority group that should not be discriminated. So I think it's extremely important today to stand up against anti-Semitism, Jews and non-Jews alike.
I want to talk, though, about work that you have done and what you're doing to really try and move the needle and to try and move the conversation in support of Israel, in support of the Jewish people, which, I mean, I certainly am very grateful for, Virag, because we need as many allies out there. And it's not just allies in my book. It's something that you also talked about earlier on, and that's knowledge, education, in what's true and what's not true. Right?
Yeah.
Because there are narratives that we see on television. When I turn on, network television, and they get the story wrong, and they get the facts wrong, and it's twisted. And that's why there are organizations and watchdogs that actually catch people, and thank God for them. It's the most frustrating thing, because that's how most people are getting their news, and they don't bother to listen to podcasts about Israel, to read books, etc. So it's a larger issue, and you pointed that out, that this is all a larger issue. So in all of this, if we can talk a little bit about your advocacy work and how you've gotten your hands dirty. And I, for one, once again, am extraordinarily thankful for the work that you've done and the work that you're continuing to do.
So while I appreciate, the good words and the thank yous, I don't even think that there is a need for that, honestly. Like, what I do should not be special. What I do should not be put on a pedestal, especially not just because I'm a non-Jew. And oftentimes when they ask me to speak at events, I start with that. I'm not here as a token non-Jew, that whatever I say should validate because I am a non-Jew. Because it's a slippery slope, I do believe that the community that I have built up on this Facebook page that's called Almost Jewish, the reason it's so valuable, because there are really, really people from all sides of the political spectrum, also from religious denominations, nationalities, race, whatsoever. And they often disagree with me, and they still follow the page. So I really wanted to achieve this, that don't like me as long as I say what you want to hear. Don't like me as long as I post pretty pictures about about Israel on Facebook. I work in this niche, and yes, I could actually have easily 50, 100,000 followers. I know how to tick the system, but I didn't want that. I didn't want to become someone just because I know which pictures or which quotes to share. I want to be me, and I write when I have something to say. Your question was very loaded with so many sub questions, but
all my questions are loaded, actually, Virag.
Yes,
that's what I do.
For my partially jet lag mind, you are really challenging me here with this question. It's fine.
I apologize.
No, I'm trying to, be here and deal with you.
Oh, you're doing a great job. We appreciate it.
Thank you. So the advocacy work itself. I appreciated that you didn't say pro-Israel advocate, but you actually said Israel advocate. That's already a step towards the good, I think.
And I want to talk about language and the importance in just a sec, or if you want to address it also, because I was going to go there as well, but carry on, please.
Yes, that's extremely important. So in the beginning, when I was such a virgin in this niche, first of all, this whole Hasbara, when people started to tell me you are doing Hasbara, I needed to Google what that means, because obviously I had zero idea. And then people called me pro-Israel activist, and I went with the notion again. I had no idea, what I'm entering into. let alone that it's going to be something that paves the way forward to me, and that I can bring an added value. I started to write for my own self seeking, and I wanted to understand my own questions and answer them. And then slowly but surely it became interesting to other people, and I think it's really beautiful. But I don't like using pro-Israel now. After 6-7 years of being in this niche, I understand way more. Pro-Israel already indicates that I'm anti something. So if I go on a street and I meet a Palestinian and I say I'm a pro-Israel activist, he's going to say, yeah, of course, you are anti-me. You don't want the Palestinians to exist. You want to kill our children. That's a very false notion. And I think we need to stop saying that. Because, and that is an example I also give when I was talking with Russells, like there's so much Hungary and hatred out there. Yeah, today, so much misunderstanding towards my country, and prejudice and stereotypes. And I am a very strong patriot. Like my heart is really, a proud one. But I won't call myself pro-Hungarian activist, because I don't need to be pro-Hungarian. I just need to be a decent Hungarian person. And whenever I can, I bring in some facts. The same with Israel. The moment you say pro, it means that actually you can be anti-Israel, which means you can question Israel's legitimacy. So it's a dead end.
I agree. And when I was thinking about this before our conversation, would I say I'm pro Norway, or would I say I'm pro Thailand or pro Portugal? I'm pro every country because I love
Yeah.
every country, right? So I
Yeah.
agree with you 100%. Israel seems to be the only country that we're either pro or we're
Yeah.
anti. I can't think of another example.
Yeah. You never really say I'm pro Iran or pro, I don't know. It's really just pro Israel, anti Palestinian. That's the only thing.
Yeah.
And that's why words really matter. And I think that's where kind of this niche is really losing. And again, it's a cliche, but we are really losing the PR war in this sense, because for a long time we let the other side dictate the language, and we were just defending ourselves. When people say, oh, Israel, is an apartheid, and we say, yeah, but there are, I don't know how many Knesset members, in the parliament. No, we need to kill the notion at this moment if someone is saying apartheid. What is apartheid? Let's define together. You define apartheid, and then you say, okay, so let's see the picture from Israel. Is it really apartheid, or you are just being morally, intellectually, and in any other way dishonest with yourself? Because if that is the case, you are an anti-Semite person, period.
Right.
So, yes.
Well, Virak, you write the blog. In addition to that, you're the New York City coordinator for the grassroots movement called End Jew Hatred. And you're doing a yeoman's job in terms of the work that you're doing. I want to ask you about the threats that you've gotten and how do you deal with the backlash? So we had Noah Tishby, for example, on the program, and I said, Noah, how do you deal with that on social media? She said, I just ignore it. And I asked the same thing of Yusuf Haddad, who is, Yusuf, right? Who's
Yes.
just a wonderful, wonderful
Yeah.
chap. We had him several episodes ago. And I told him what Noah said, that she just ignores it. And he said, look, it's very easy for Noah. And he spoke very highly of Noah, and I adore Noah.
Sure.
He said, but she can say that, but when I'm getting, meaning Yusuf, when I'm getting death threats and people say, I know where you live, he said, that's a whole different ball game. He said, I got to be very careful for myself, for my family, and for my community. And
Yeah.
so I'm wondering, how do you then deal with the backlash that you've gotten?
I don't think you can ever get used to it, especially if you want to kind of like preserve your innocence in as a human being. It's like we are so used to the terrorist attacks that soon we are not even blinking, or we don't even cry anymore when something happens. So like the threshold is just getting higher. The first time I got death threats, I broke down. Obviously, I was totally freaking out. And then one moment, or one time, a couple of years ago, I got a whole mob on me. It's like 50 people mobbed on me online and bullied me, but like, you should die with Jews in the gas chamber. Again, we know where you live and so. And I am in America alone. I don't have family in America at all. I came here with my baggage and luggage, and ever since, I'm trying to to follow my dreams, follow my intuitions and what's good for me. But in that morning, I really understood how 14 years old could be bullied into suicide. And I tell you why, because I was going through the hardest, most challenging breakup ever in my life. And then I am struggling with that. And then I wake up for this. And it was emotionally and mentally so overwhelming that I just wanted to give up everything. So I even closed everything. I was like, this is not worth it. I just can't do this. 3 days later, I was back in business, because that's what I'm telling you, that I just can't explain why. Nowadays, it's better. I do ignore many unless I see some kind of real danger in that. And then I talk with a lawyer about it. One of the worst situation was again when, and it's a very true story. One of the followers who follows my page, he said, look, I could be ashamed about it, but I'd rather save you than being playing on my ego. He was on a porn site and he saw my picture on a porn site, all dressed up, obviously, it's not. What basically happened is that someone downloaded pictures from my Facebook and Instagram, along with 5 other very vocal Zionist faces, girls, all of them are female. And they put us up on a porn site with different derogative names. I won't maybe mention it on your show, but so, you see yourself, you have a whole description, they know your name, they know your email, you have your face, and even though the pictures obviously are decent ones, still you are on a porn site. So that was a little scary. Eventually we found out that it was from Ukraine. So what they could do, the IP based on the IP address, they deleted the user, but there couldn't be any consequences other than that, because it's such a lax world, there are zero checks and balances. But these things never should happen. Something just because you identify as a Zionist, or when people spat on me on the street just because I am a Zionist. And I will be very honest, I also get a lot of less and less, but in the beginning especially, I got a lot of pushback from certain Jewish communities as well. And again, that is something I consider, that's people are people in every community. So you're going to have the rotten apples on whatever you go. That's taken as such. But yeah, so it's harder. And I don't think you can ignore it unless really you have, such a safety net behind you, both in terms of, like family or the security people or something. But when I speak at an event, I usually don't go home immediately. And most of the times my parents would not know that I spoke. Or like I go to a rally, my mom is always telling me, don't be on the first row. I was like, sure, mom, I won't be in the first row.
What do they think of your advocacy work?
Yeah, that's a returning question. I do believe that one of a very tangible success, and it might sound, silly, but for me it's not, is regarding my parents, that today they both identify as Zionists. Something that their whole life they heard that is a curse word that is extremely negative. I mean, the whole communist regime, obviously it's saying Zionist, it's negative, it's bad. So now actually my mom is my media observer in Hungary. So whenever there is an action, she just sends me the message. These are the news from Israel, came out this way. I think the media said the right thing. And, so she's like kind of checking for me, like a fact checker. On a serious note, in the beginning, they really didn't understand what was going on with me. They were a little bit like skeptical about my well, not sanity, I'm just joking around, but like they said, you are more Jewish now than Hungarian or something. So this is like, they didn't know where to put me, of course. And my parents don't speak English. They are the generation who were forced to learn Russian. So they didn't even understand what I was actually doing. And then somehow my article got translated to Hungarian by a journalist. And then a whole new world opened up because they started to interview me in Hungarian, in TV and radio and some. And that's when my dad said, I'm proud of you, how you stand up for something so beautiful. And since then, it's been a lovely discussion among us as well.
It sounds to me almost like your fighting spirit comes from them. Were they involved at all in the pro-democracy movement in Hungary?
Yes, especially my dad. look, they suffered a lot. So the moment you openly refused to join the regime, you were an outcast. You never knew who was reporting on you. And my dad started out as a journalist, but then he stopped because, even though there was no official censorship, he couldn't write just about anything. So he gave that up. He couldn't go to the university he wanted to just because his dad was a priest. So that was a punishment. When he went to the army for his obligatory mandatory service, they took him to the end of Hungary just as a punishment because he's against the regime, while my mom was pregnant with me, like miles away. So these are very, very heavy issues. And even more so that today he can go to the archives and see his files. And even that is censored. Not everything is written. Some names are taken out and many, many files are still missing, and probably on purpose. But when you actually need to face the truth that two people that you trusted as a friend during your younger ages, during your 20s, they were both reporting on you. How do you mentally, get out of that? So communism was not only a regime, it was a psychological terror. You cannot trust anyone. And I see the difference between myself and my parents on that matter as well. How they are not trusting anything and anyone. It takes them so much time. Whereas me, I'm like, all over full-heartedly in the world. And yes, I get my share of dissatisfaction and sorrow, but I go into the world with so much more hope than they had.
And how lucky we are to be living today where we do have freedom, where we do have democracy, and at least here in this country where people demonize the United States. And I think to myself, my goodness, why are people wanting to come to the United States if it's such a bad country?
Yeah.
Which is a whole topic for another time, but it just boggles the mind. I was speaking with a very dear friend of mine whose grandparents survived the Shoah. And he was telling me, he said his grandmother and great grandmother lived for 4 years in the sewers of Paris. And his great grandmother had come from Poland, did not speak French. And for 4 years, she had to pretend that she was deaf and mute just to survive because she didn't speak French. I mean, so and I bring this up because, again, to illustrate that for all the nonsense that any country has, how lucky we are, and we really have to cherish our democracy, our freedom, and the right to speak, and the right to speak out, and the right to use our voice. And that's really where I want to go with you right now, Virag, because, since 1975, when the UN declared Zionism as racism. And dare I say, I'm old enough to remember that. And then, of course, we had the Durban Conference. And then, of course, we're having Durban 2 right now. So in this whole arc, if you will, of anti-Zionism that we've seen, how would you suggest young people respond? How should young people and old people and middle-aged people, how should everybody really use their voice? And I did start out by saying young people because I think the tendency is that the youngins, as we say, are those that are a little bit more tech savvy and more media savvy and are on the TikToks and the Instagrams and so on. So really, how would you suggest people respond and use their voice?
You're right in the fact that young people are the ones who are tech savvy, but they are the most reluctant to actually act. They are missing that vibe, they're missing that energy, they are missing the chutzpah, if I may say that the older generation have and had to have. Because starting from my parents, but also in America, even from Martin Luther King, those people are alive, they were part of history, they had to go on the street and fight for something. The current generation, and especially if I'm talking about America, the level of, without hurting anyone factually and generalizing, the level of entitlement makes this generation so lazy that in a way there is an apathy. The only wave they want to ride is the convenient one, which is, let's be mainstream. Let's agree that, we are all just need to hug each other and we are all human beings, which obviously is true. But in this whole big woke language, we forget to stay sane. Seriously, that's what I'm saying now. You just forget the basic common senses, and we are trying to override that. So the next generation is, I don't understand. I don't really know yet how they're gonna come from this comfortable situation where they are put at. And they're gonna, because we see where the world is going, and you need to challenge situation and things and ideologies. And somehow, isn't that the progression of our life, that in our younger ages we need to fight for a better world, and as you age, you are slowing down in that big vehemency. But I don't see that from the young people now. I see it only when it is trendy, kind of like a peer pressure, oh, let's march with the BDS on the street. I have zero idea what BDS is. I never read the charter. I never saw that actually they want to eliminate Jews, or it's discriminatory against the Jews, or it is really fueling Jew hatred. I march because that's trendy. That looks good on TikTok. That looks good on Instagram. I'm gonna get the likes. And that's a very dangerous game. Especially, I mentioned to you before, I know how to crack the system to become a famous influencer, and yet I'm not doing on purpose. But many young kids want to be someone from one day to another. So if they're going to see that, for example, just a couple of days, globalized intifada, it's trending all over the net, and I'm in Brooklyn. Hell, I'm going to go out, do a quick video and post it. Yes, globalized intifada. But I won't go into the fact what intifada actually means, that is the normalization of Jew hatred and terrorism against Jews. So we are again beautifying terrorism. And it's a very big problem. I don't really see the solution yet. Solution for me, obviously, is what everyone is saying, education, but perhaps differently. I think when it comes to the Jewish communities, what we are, and I'm involving, but including myself, what we are trying to avoid is what the LGBT community is doing perfectly. Every day, from morning to evening, they explain to you what word can you use, why you cannot use this word, how you are hurting my feelings if you are not using the right pronoun. I'm not saying that this is everything I can support as a normal person, but they really achieve something that you know how to talk to them. If you don't do that, you are homophobic. When it comes to Jewish people, again, we are failing on this. We are not educating the other side. And the other thing I think it's very important, that is such a sensitive topic that we immediately become so hateful towards the other person. We cancel the other person immediately if they say something bad. For me, my rule, and again, as I mature and I age, I become calmer and more, I don't know, straight-headed in that sense. For 5 minutes, I assume the good about you. I only assume the good. I assume that you just may be ignorant, you just don't know better. If after the 5 minutes you keep on proving me that you are actually not even able to acknowledge certain things or uphold the proper conversation, then you are an anti-Semite, and then I treat you differently. Then my debate with you is gonna be very different. And yeah.
I want to go back to not educating ourselves, because it seems to me that there are many in the Jewish community, and I will call many in the Jewish community out for not educating themselves about the rise in anti-Semitism. But it's not just the negatives that they haven't educated themselves about. And believe me, I believe that life is a journey, and I believe that learning should be a lifelong process, right? It's not just the end. That's why the old cliche, that's why when you get your diploma after 4 years of college, they call it commencement, because you're just beginning. It's not just the end, it's the beginning. So I believe that about life. But I think that we as a Jewish community, and those that are advocates in the Jewish community and for the Jewish community, we have to do a better job educating and informing and really showing the beauty of Judaism and the beauty of Israel, and to have that sense of pride. I mean, that's something that I've certainly gotten, is a message from the people that I've spoken to here on Israelcast, as well as our Jewish National Fund reading series, is that we should be positive about our Judaism and be positive about Israel and be proud of all of it, because there's 3,500 years plus to be proud of, really, when you think about it. But going back to the question of what people can do. So it sounds to me like we have a very challenging job when it comes to, again, activating young folks. And I think that part of it has to do with education. And for any parent that's listening out there, take note, because it's their job. I think it all begins in the family and it begins at home. You can't just farm it out to the Hebrew school every Sunday and expect them, meaning the kids, to grow up to be proud Jews and to be proud supporters of Israel.
Right.
Or both. So it really starts with the parents and it starts with the families first and foremost. So then let's talk about those that are adults. What can adults do to really, as I like to say, move the needle on this and to try and change the paradigm and change the conversation and to, really educate?
So I'm looking down because I forgot to my notepad, which I always have, especially with you, it would have been so useful with your big questions, and sub questions. I usually take notes, but I'm like taking notes on my phone now. There are so many interesting points that you are raising, and I really enjoy the conversation, and you are very thought-provoking also for me. When it comes to education, let me compare, for example, the US and Hungary, especially because there is this huge prejudice against Hungary. Like, do you know how many times I say in a Jewish community here in America that I'm Hungarian, and I'm immediately labeled, oh, you guys, the anti-Semites. I understand that history is weighing on us heavily, but I also believe that being stuck in the past is not going to help us better our future. We need to acknowledge, take responsibility, but what is my generation has to do with that? Nothing. What I can assure that we learn from it and we really never repeat that. Today in Hungary, Holocaust education is mandatory. You won't find any high school student who will think that Hitler was a cool guy, as opposed to the situation in New Jersey a couple of months ago, when a 10-year-old kid, with the parents' approval, could write a character study or assessment about Hitler. And the conclusion of that essay was that Hitler was a cool guy. And I understand that, freedom of speech in America is a cornerstone of your society and the whole democracy. But I always say that that's my biggest culture shock. The fine line between, free speech and allowing hate speech, like really, where is the fine line? Or a 10-year-old, is it really a 10-year-old? Is it really okay in a school that a 10-year-old has this kind of freedom without the checks and balances coming from a teacher? And I understand from my teacher friend that it's a property, intellectual property, that the kid wrote this essay, and we need to respect that. But I assume that you go to school for some kind of guidance, that the teacher will actually push you back on that, hey, Hitler was not a good person, instead of putting that essay up on the public wall in a school so that other kids can read that too. So these things in Hungary could not happen. And simply because of, for me, a common sense, not because it's being censored, but simply you are educated in a way about the Holocaust that, yes, let's assure it doesn't happen again. Holocaust denial in Hungary is a felony. You either go to jail or you need to go to a Holocaust museum and educate yourself. So in New York, for example, it's businesses every day. It's just crazy how things can fly in the US that are blocked, for example, online over Europe, like the YouTube videos you cannot watch from Hungary that are related to Holocaust denial, where in the US, it's part of free speech. Holocaust education is mandatory, like what, in certain states now in the US, not even mandatory, but like suggested topic. What do you expect from the next generation if they don't get that basic education on the one of the most cruel genocide ever committed against people, and then they go on Facebook and all they see is that poor Palestinian kids is being murdered by the Jews? So there's not even a countering narrative that they can, say, okay, this is that, then I go in the middle, I do my own research or thinking. And unfortunately, this is something that the Jewish kids are facing. You mentioned Hebrew school. Not every Jewish kids are going to Hebrew school. They just observe social media headlines, and that is why you have Jewish Voice for Peace and likes who are actually agreeing that Israel is an apartheid. Or like now with the Ben and Jerry situation, how many Jewish organization actually came up that yes, it is okay that Ben and Jerry is boycotting Judea and Samaria. So your question, I believe, was, what can the elder people do, or like the more like not high school and college student kids do? I mean, as you said,
like people my age.
Thank you, or my age.
Yes.
Maybe, I don't know. But so as you said, education starts at home. So it's their responsibility that even if they don't have kids per se, but if they have, it's a very easy, answer. Okay, educate your kids, sit down with them, and then so on. But if you don't have that, or you want something else, I really like that idea of reaching out to your neighbor, asking them if they, especially if they're not Jewish. How amazing is that? Invite them over for Shabbat dinner. That started with me, So even if they are not prejudiced against Jews, like the neighbor, bringing them into your home, they will understand more. And when it comes to, for example, an anti-Semitic attack, they will be more likely to stand behind you because they have a personal experience with a Jew. So it's so easy because we stereotype so easily today. Like we meet one person and if you happen to be a Muslim, oh, I'm gonna hate all Muslims because you are like that. That's psychology. But this something that's on an individual level, we need to have an emotional intelligence and an intellect to fight that back. And the same applies on a collective matter, let's not generalize.
And do you know what I would suggest actually also, Virak, is that if you go to someone's home for dinner, you know how you bring a bottle of wine or you bring flowers, why not bring a book? Why not bring Ben Freeman's book about Jewish pride? Or why not bring Noah Tishby's book about Israel, or Alex Rivchin's book, The Anti-Israel Agenda, or the other book that he wrote about Zionism? Bring those books to people, whether they're Jewish or not Jewish, and say, you know what, this is a great book. Stephen recommends it on Israelcast. Stephen's interviewed the authors. Stephen knows them, and it's Stephen approved. Jokes aside, but bring those kinds of books to people, or during the Christmas, Hanukkah season, give those books, have people read and have them dip into that, because I think it's through knowledge that, just like in your case, as we start our conversation, it's through knowledge that the change begins to happen, because we can't rely on the mainstream media for it, because they're hopeless, absolutely hopeless. And that's I'll go on the record in saying that. And I can go on about how I've actually called them out on a number of occasions recently, and the responses that I've gotten, which have been absolutely astonishingly irresponsible from them, shall we say. Well, listen, Virak, I know that you are just massively jet lagged, so I want to begin to just wind down our conversation. You've been so gracious
I'm enjoying it,
with your time. Well, listen, I'm as well. This is going to be part one of Virak's conversation on Israelcast. But as we wind down this part of our conversation, I just want to leave on a bit of a lighter note, because I know that you're a roller skater. So you took up roller skating, as I understand, like 3 months ago. And before we started rolling, you said something about that you weren't very good. And I said that you're probably better than me. But I mean, clearly you were a ballet dancer, so you must have very good balance.
Yes, that's the only thing kind of what I have, coordination. But don't forget, when you're a ballet dancer, you are forbidden to do any other sports, because everything is a danger factor, or it uses different muscles. So like, ballet dancers are very like walking like ducks. But when you need to skate, you need to be parallel. So I have zero muscles for that. I took up a couple of months ago, and that's just freedom for me now. That's my therapy. That's my sanity. That's my everything. So just yesterday night, I think maybe I mentioned that I had all this, delayed flights and craziness. And then I arrived to an airport hotel in Denver. It was 8 o'clock, and I looked out and I saw the asphalt with the parking area. I just put on my skates, and from 8 to 9:30, I was just out, and the day just became beautiful.
How wonderful is that? By the way, though, you had said that you had been accepted into the Royal Danish Ballet.
Yes.
You must have been an extraordinary ballet dancer, because that is really one of the world's premier ballet companies.
Yes, indeed it was. And I was very hesitant, but I think I made the right choice. I got a different life.
You took a different path, indeed. Yes. Now, as we really wind down our conversation, you have been to Israel, I think you said 20 times.
Yes.
20 times and counting. If you were to take us to that one spot that is I don't want to say your favorite spot, but I'm going to ask you your favorite spot in Israel. Or just how about this, Vera? Because I don't want to put you on the spot here. What's one spot that you'd want to take us to, that you'd want to show us?
I wouldn't pick a spot. I would say get into the car in Tel Aviv and start driving down to the Dead Sea. And then you're going to end up in that beautiful road in the middle of the desert in the Negev and just put up Shlomo Artzi in full power in your car. And that's for me the biggest experience. Like that's I'm never gonna forget. In the desert with the Hebrew song from Shlomo Artzi, and that's the most beautiful experience ever.
I like that. And I bet you can't wait to go back. And I bet you
Oh,
can't
yeah.
wait to go roller skating in Israel.
Yes, I have some work to do now, so that is keeping for me today. But yeah.
Well, one of these days, very soon, hopefully you'll be back on a plane. And listen, we will see you there, or we'll see you here in New York, or we'll see you once again here, hopefully very soon on Israelcast. Vera Guyash, this has been an absolute pleasure. And once again, thank you so much for all of your work, for everything that you're doing. And thanks so much for joining us here on Israelcast. And we'll have info about Vera on the show notes page of this episode on our website, jnf.org/Israelcast. And before we move on with housekeeping, I'd just like to remind you once again that Jewish National Fund USA believes the time has indeed come for us to reclaim the narrative, take ownership of the word Zionism, and show the world how beautiful, inclusive, and inspirational it really is, as we've just been talking about. So do join Jewish National Fund USA's Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. It's a year-long series which will educate, engage, and inspire on the true meaning of the word Zionism and reclaim its true meaning in all of its glory. So do go to jnf.org/convos for more. And of course, as I always say, we do release new episodes of the show of Israelcast every other Wednesday. And just so you never miss an episode, subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. Simply search for Israelcast. That easy. How do you like that? And don't forget to rate and review us to make it easier for more people around the world to find us. Or you can always enjoy the show by visiting us at our website. Once again, jnf.org/Israelcast. All right, now it takes a homoshav to put Israelcast together. And for that, we thank Vivian Grossman, Dara Shapiro, and Olivia Schendel. Our editors are Jay Rothman and James Casada from Mirrortone Studios, right here in the very heart of New York City. And the music that you hear at the top until the program is titled My Eden. It's by the very talented Rafi Malkiel from his album Water on the Tzaddik label. Now, Israelcast is indeed powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. For more information about JNF USA, visit jnf.org. And if you'd like to write to us with story ideas or just to say howdy, we would all love to hear from you. So do email us at israelcast@jnf.org. Meantime, I'm Stephen Shalowitz, thanking you for tuning in and looking forward to having you join us on future episodes of Israelcast.